We have the wanted list lined up. So let's confront the crisis and ask, is this crisis any different? Hello and good morning. Thanks to Minister Lino and Dr. Torre for their welcome and their opening remarks. Thanks also to Philippa Biggs, who put together the report Dr. Torre showed you. Excellent economic report, and of course we'll be talking about the contents of that report today. As Dr. Torre observed, we live in turbulent times, and that's why the global financial and economic crisis will be examined in this session, as well as predictions for the future economic outlook. Dr. Torre also referred to opportunities being there for those who recognise them, and that I couldn't agree with more. I also want to look at the different regional perspectives on the crisis, including the outlook from the developing world. We'll consider differences and similarities with previous financial downturns, including the 1997 Asian currency crisis and the bursting of the dot-com bubble in 2001-2002, and ask, have we all been here before? And are there any lessons from the dot-com crash that can help telecom ICT companies confront this crisis? To try and answer some of those questions, and yours too, because we do want to make this an interactive session. No speeches from the floor, but really good, hard questions will be welcomed. We have an extremely distinguished panel. Mr. Jonathan Koppel from the OECD, Mr. Herbert Heitman, Chief Communications Officer, SAP AG, Mr. Kwame Sundaram-Jomo, Assistant Secretary General for Economic Development, Department of Economic and Social Affairs, United Nations, Mr. Robert Kahn, co-inventor of the Internet and Chairman, CEO and President, Corporation of National Research Initiatives, Mrs. Gariani, Secretary General of the Arab Information and Communication Technologies Organization. This is a new one on me. It's only been around for about a year. Is that right, Mrs. Gariani? Yeah, about a year. So congratulations for lasting this long. Mr. Ernest Ndukwe, Executive Vice Chairman and CEO of the Nigerian Communications Commission, and Mr. Don Tapscott, Chairman of Engineer Insight. It's now, as we all know, we've been counting, 7 months since Lehman Brothers went bankrupt and Wall Street teetered on the edge of oblivion. But as far as I can see, the financial mess still hasn't been cleared up. The global economy, like the pirates in the Gulf of Aden, are sailing in stormy waters. And we are in Portugal. We're better to set off into uncharted waters than Lisbon. And although all this began 18 months ago, I wonder what, if anything, has been learned. Are all recessions bad news? Or can good news come out of recessions? Who could learn or benefit from them, as Dr. Torre asked? I was told by a senior economist this week that one bank, who will be nameless, Goldman Sachs, has just given staff a 35% pay rise. The bank has set aside a $4.7 billion compensation pot for the first 3 months of this year. Last year, 973 bankers were paid $1 million each. Crisis, what crisis? Nationally, the Treasury Secretary, Tim Geithner, as you know, presented gazillion-dollar plan after gazillion-dollar plan to try and detoxify the balance sheet. Despite the President trying to talk it up last week, I can't see any real green shoots, or, as The Economist said about China, bamboo shoots this week. There are new reports of gloom and doom almost every day. The IMF is predicting that for the first time in 60 years, world economic activity will decline this year. Others are having huge problems trying to forecast with any great accuracy our future direction. I'll be asking the panelists for their predictions at the end of the session, so they can start thinking about their answers now. We'll compare, as I said, the 1997 Asian currency crisis and dot-com, and ask, have we been here before? And of course the answer is yes, sort of. No crisis is exactly the same, but there are always similarities. Galbraith wrote of the Great Crash in 1929. The singular feature of the Great Crash of 1929 was that the worst continued to worsen. What looked one day like the end proved on the next day to have been only the beginning. I don't think it's quite as depressing as that. The World Bank points out that most countries in East Asia were relatively well placed to withstand the financial turmoil. That was because they'd learnt the lessons of a financial crisis of 97-98. They've also reduced government debt and strengthened bank regulation, so lessons were learnt. I hope Gordon Brown will take notice. The Great Depression was America's deepest economic slump, but at just under 4 years, it wasn't the longest. The longest, I think, goes back to 1873. That one lasted about 6 years. So are developing countries more prone to depression? There have been fewer than 13 instances in the last 30 years of a decline in real GDP of more than 10%. And that was in 96-97 that we witnessed some of the worst economic problems when the so-called Asian tigers and the so-called watertight economies sank fast. So fast that the Asian financial crisis of the late 1990s helped bring regime change in both countries, where it started, Thailand and Indonesia. The various economies suffered in different ways, but they shared a number of common factors. Across the region, expectations about future growth became extravagant and capital became cheap, encouraging over-borrowing. Much of the money was squandered on speculative property investment or the over-expansion of industrial capacity. At the same time, a fatal combination of pegged exchange rates and over-hasty openings of economies to short-term foreign capital caused a surge in debt to foreign banks. So does anyone see any similarities with any of that with today? Or does the explosive growth of ICTs change all that? But enough of that, the context. I want to move on to the conclusion, which may sound bizarre at this stage. And that is, ICTs are part of the solution, not the problem. And of course, the reality is, you can't generalize, because while some technologies I see are dead in the water, others continue to grow and succeed. Perhaps, for example, mobiles are obviously flourishing, but WiMAX is suffering. There is some collateral damage, but this is, I believe, a time of opportunity.